On the Embankment by Hugh E. Wright. Do you know the Embankment? I don't mean the embankment you can see through the windows of your hurrying taxi as you drive into the city to see your most respectable solicitor about that matter of the drains at Hampstead. I don't mean the row of flaring lights, each reflected in the blackness of the sloppy pavement, as you see it from the windows of the Savoy when you're having supper after the theatre on a wet night. I mean the Embankment at 2 o'clock in the morning, in a driving November drizzle, when the tide of London's gaiety has ebbed and left its residue of London driftwood high, and wishing to God it were dry, littered about under bridges, on seats, and in unexpected crannies and corners, which even the most optimistic would hardly call sheltered. Stark and ugly the wreckage is, battered by many winds and tides, broken and twisted by storm and stress, grim caricatures of the past. Do you know that Embankment? Think yourself lucky if you do not. And possibly it has changed now. I am thinking of 15 years ago, before the electric trams buzzed angrily up and down it at half-hour intervals and shattered its silence and solitude with their clanging bells and flashing lights. They sleep lightly, those London derelicts, and are easily disturbed. Possibly they have drifted to quieter quarters. Midway between the Avenue and Westminster Bridge, there is a seat that has a story and a peculiarity. Its peculiarity is this: no matter at what time of night you pass it, no matter how crowded with dilapidated humanity the seats next to it may be, that seat is always empty. 15 years ago it was empty. Each night for 20-odd years before that it had been empty. And unless the hand of time, or the LCC, has removed it, I am willing to gamble that it is empty now. That's queer, isn't it? And the story about it is queerer still. But it's not my story, so before I tell it to you, I'd better explain how I got it. It happened about 15 years ago. I was doing a spell of night work at the office, and my road home took me along the Embankment there at 3:15 every morning. Every morning for a week or more, I passed that empty seat and wondered why it was empty. Once I stopped a policeman and asked him. He admitted that it seemed funny, but, like the noble 600, is not to reason why, and he reckoned it was just fancy. I wasn't satisfied with that, and a week or so later, fate sent me to the one man in London who knew the story. I was introduced to him at a club dinner. He was 20 years my senior, I should think, and, as I knew, had the reputation of knowing more about odd corners of London than any other man living. He had left successful journalism for successful literature, and I was a little in awe of him. However, he sat next to me at dinner and was great enough to bring me into the conversation and take a real interest in what little I had to contribute towards it. During dinner, the idea flashed through my mind. I wonder if he knows anything about that empty seat. I've a good mind to ask him. But it wasn't till the coffee and cigars that I found courage enough to say, "There's a little bit of London I know that I feel sure must have some story connected with it. I wonder if you could help me." "London's a biggish village," he answered pleasantly. "But if I know it, I will. What place is it?" "Strictly speaking, it isn't even a place within the meaning of the act," I said, hesitatingly. Now I'm asking you, I'm afraid it sounds unutterably silly. It's only an empty seat on the embankment." He was raising his coffee cup to his lips, but he put it down again untouched. "Between the Avenue and Westminster Bridge," he said, slowly. "You know it then?" I asked, with some relief. "Yes, I know it," he said, and looked at me queerly. "So it's still empty," he added, half to himself. "It was all last week," I replied, and explained how I knew. The man on the other side of him dragged him into some argument, and for some time I didn't get a chance of getting another word in. In fact, he was just rising to go home before I found my opportunity. "Excuse me," I said quickly, "about that story. Still want it?" he said, smiling. "Rather, if you don't mind," I replied eagerly. "Come and have dinner at my place Thursday week then. You know my address?" You can easily understand that I didn't take long accepting his invitation. "And, by the way," he added, ignoring my thanks, "if we get a dry night between now and then, have another look at that seat at about 7 or 8 in the morning. If you notice anything else odd about it, you can tell me, and you shall have the story in exchange. Good night." Well, 3 days later it was bone dry, and about 7:30 next morning I strolled down the embankment to have another look at the seat, as he had suggested. I wasn't going to run any risk of losing the story if I could help it. The seat looked ordinary enough in the early daylight. The only thing that I noticed at all was that there was a little puddle of water at one end of it, as if someone had been wringing out a wet towel. It couldn't have been rain. The night, as I said, had been fine, and besides, the other end of the bench was quite dry. I looked over it minutely, but could find nothing out of the ordinary, and eventually tore myself away, very much disappointed. Thursday night arrived, and with it my dinner with the great man. He was most affable. During dinner, he asked me if I had been to see the seat any morning, and if I had found anything. "I went and looked on Saturday morning," I replied, "but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary." "No little detail at all?" he asked. "One thing I noticed," I said doubtfully, "but it seems hardly worth mentioning." "What was that?" "One end of the seat was quite wet, and there'd been no rain in the night, you know." My host didn't say anything, but I fancied he grew thoughtful. After dinner, he told me the story. I asked him why he didn't write it himself. "I was a bit too close to it to get the proper perspective," he said. "But if you want it for copy, use it by all means. Don't mention my name, that's all. You won't do anything with it, though. Nobody will believe it, and if they did, they wouldn't like it. It isn't funny, and it isn't pretty. Take my advice and leave it alone." I haven't taken his advice, and here it is. I've tried to tell it as nearly as possible the way he told it to me. But he's quite right about one thing. It isn't pretty. It's a funny coincidence that you should ask me the story of the empty seat, because, I suppose, barring one other, I'm the only man who knows it, began my host. I haven't told it to anyone else either. For one thing, I have to confess to 2 crimes against society: poverty and cowardice. I started by being very poor, and ended by being very frightened. I suppose the former matters most, but perhaps even that may be forgiven me after over 20 years. He puffed lazily at his cigar for a minute or two, and then resumed his story. Yes, it's well over 20 years ago, but I haven't forgotten that seat, and I don't think I ever shall. Have you ever been very poor? I don't mean just hard up, but absolutely broke to the wide, on your uppers. I was then, and it's not pleasant, I assure you. And even I wasn't absolutely destitute like most of those poor beggars down there. I had a job to go to in a fortnight's time, a fairly decent suit of clothes on my back, shoes that kept the wet out, and exactly 2 and 4pence in my pocket. I had a portmanteau in the cloakroom at Charing Cross, too. But, on the other hand, I didn't know a soul in London who'd trust me with board and lodging, so I had to leave it there, eating up a penny a day out of my modest savings, or else carry it about with me wherever I went. I soon made up my mind to reserve my 2 and 4pence for food. I thought I could just manage to keep body and soul together on that, but I couldn't see any margin for sleeping accommodation. I'd read about people who'd started on the Embankment, and I thought I'd try that. It sounded rather romantic somehow. It would be fine to look back on and say one had been through it. After all, it was only for a fortnight. One is several different kinds of a fool at 22. I won't weary you by telling you how I got through that first day. It was pretty deadly, though. Still, London was new to me. There were shops to look at, and people to watch, and it kept dry. That was one comfort. I know that by midnight I was dog-tired. Half an hour later the crowds began to thin, and I made my way slowly towards the Embankment, the goal of all my hopes. My idea was that I should find a seat, stretch myself out as comfortably as might be, and fall asleep. You can judge my surprise and annoyance to find that each seat I came to was packed with bundles of rags, which on closer inspection proved to be human beings. And not only the seat, every possible corner that promised any sort of shelter had its human occupant. I was a good half hour too late. I slopped along despondently. To make matters worse, a thin drizzle had started, and I wondered vaguely where on earth I was going to rest that night. That the Embankment should be full up seemed to me to be the last straw. About halfway between the Avenue and Westminster Bridge, I suddenly saw a ray of hope. To my surprise, I spotted a vacant seat on one of the benches. It was the end seat, too, although the rest of the bench was crowded with 5 or 6 ragamuffins huddled together in grotesque heaps. They looked up incuriously as I approached, and I was about to sit down when something at the end of the bench said, in a hoarse voice, "The stalls is all reserved, Cully. Try higher up in the gallery." There was a tee-hee of feminine laughter, and another voice squeaked, "Go on, can't you see he's looking for the royal box?" A third voice grumbled wrathfully, "Anyhow, he can't sit here. Blasted toff. Op it, see?" Then the man next to the vacant seat spoke. He was a ferrety individual, with a pale face and watery, red-rimmed eyes. A bowler hat, several sizes too large, was pushed down over his ears, and his only clothing appeared to be an enormous, dirty yellow overcoat, tied round the middle with a bit of cord. "Shut up," he snarled. Then, peering up at me with shifty eyes, he whined, "Sit down, mate. Never you mind them. Swine they are. Bloomin' swine. And behave as such." There was an indistinct muttering along the bench. I thought I caught the words, What about Squinty? Got a bit of baccy? Whined the ferrety man as I sank down into the seat with a sigh of relief. I told him I hadn't. Got a copper? He whined again. No, stony, I explained. He spat accurately into the gutter and looked up at me venomously. Thought you was a bloomin' toff, he snarled, turning his back on me and digging a particularly sharp elbow into my ribs. He can't sit here, you know, toff or no toff, grumbled the voice at the end of the seat. Blast you, I know, don't I? Snarled my next-door neighbour. Shut your face. Want to spoil a bit of sport? Cackled the draggled female of the party. There'll be a bit of fun when Squinty comes along. She gave another rusty cackle of laughter, which merged into a horrible hacking cough and died away in a spluttering gurgle. I wondered hazily who Squinty was, and why there should be fun when he arrived. I was too dead tired to think connectedly, I fancy, or I should have understood. An old saying floated through my mind. It's the poor who help the poor. They seemed a nice, hospitable bunch I'd drifted amongst. I tried to squeeze myself more into the corner out of the way of that infernal elbow. I distrusted that filthy yellow coat, too. It looked verminous and stank abominably. There was silence for a bit, save for a muttered curse occasionally, and another fit of coughing from the old woman. Then I heard the sound of shuffling footsteps. A ripple ran along the line, and heads were raised. I looked up, too, and saw a man standing over me. I wish I could describe him to you properly. His age might have been anything between 40 and 70. He was tall, 6 foot at least, I should say, but he stooped a good deal, so he may have been more. He had a huge, flabby, greyish-white face, half hidden in a tangle of grey-black hair and beard, and abnormally long arms, ending in the most enormous hands I have ever seen. He wasn't so much clothed as wrapped in the sweepings of a fifth-rate old clothes shop. I counted the remnants of at least 3 overcoats, I know. He peered closely into my face, and I noticed that he had a most repulsive cast in his left eye. Needless to say, I guessed at once that he was the redoubtable Squinty, of whom I had already heard. He looked at me in silence for a minute. "Did anyone inform you that you were occupying my seat?" he said at last, in a hoarse, wheezy whisper. It was a horrible voice. It creaked and grated like a rusty hinge, and, in spite of its harshness, it was an educated voice. That made it worse, I think. "I admit I wasn't made particularly welcome," I answered. "It was even suggested I should op it, I believe, but I was certainly given no definite reason why I should do so." "A neophyte of the ancient order of tatterdemalions, I fancy," said he, peering into my face once more. If you mean this is my first night out here, yes," I answered shortly. "Don't be ashamed of it, laddie," he croaked. "Don't be ashamed of it. Everything must have a beginning. Even I had a beginning. A wonderful thought, that, for anyone of a philosophical turn." He seemed to think for a moment. He was right, you know. It was a wonderful thought. It seemed impossible to realize that frowsy, unclean abomination had once been a pink and white baby gurgling in its bath. "Don't stay there hanging with the swine, governor," pleaded my ferrety friend suddenly. "Hoof him out, Have a bit of your fun with him." "Gently, Ginger, gently," wheezed the old ruffian. "Why so impetuous? Justice shall be done. Don't be afraid. But let us be as gods tonight, Ginger, and temper justice with mercy." "I don't understand all that talk," grumbled Ginger. "Hoof him out. Give him hell. You can." "But don't let's argue about it," I said. If I've got your seat, I'll clear out." And I rose to go. Immediately a huge hand gripped me by the shoulder and forced me into the seat again. "Not so fast, young sir," whispered Squinty. Then, turning to Ginger, "Did you tell this gentleman that seat is the one that I invariably use?" "Of course I did," whined Ginger. "He would take it." "You infernal liar," I turned to him angrily. "It was you asked me to sit down, for the sake of the copper and baccy you thought you were going to get and didn't," I added, suddenly realizing the reason for his hospitality. "You oughtn't to lie, Ginger." Squinty shook his head sadly. "Swelp me gourd," began Ginger. "To lie once is a mistake," said Squinty. "To lie twice is very nearly an offence, Ginger." "I thought he might as well stop. I thought you'd like your bit of fun, governor," muttered Ginger, shifting in his seat. "I do like my bit of fun, Ginger," wheezed Squinty monotonously, "but I like to find it for myself." He bent down suddenly and seized the unfortunate Ginger by the arm, just above the elbows. Lifting him sheer off his seat, he stood him up in front of him and bent forward until he almost touched his face. "Have I found my bit of fun, Ginger? Have I?" "Gord, my arms! Gord!" moaned Ginger, writhing. "Gord, you're breaking him! Let it go, governor! Let it go, codger!" The big man turned to me. "Ginger's seat is at your service, young man. Bear with an old man's fancy if I tell you that I prefer the corner." I shifted into Ginger's seat. The other occupants of the bench looked on apathetically. Only the drab old woman gave her little cackling laugh and creaked out, "He's a one, is Squinty," and collapsed into another fit of coughing. Squinty must have been enormously powerful. Taking Ginger with him, he sat down in his corner, forcing his victim down upon his knees on the pavement. He coiled his legs round him and slowly altered his grip on Ginger's arms till both wrists were held firmly in one sinewy hand. "If you yell, Ginger, one day I'll kill you slowly," he wheezed gently. "So don't yell." And he proceeded to smack his face. It sounds funny, I know, but I think it was very nearly the most horrible thing I've ever seen. He did it in dead silence, monotonously, like a machine, with his open hand. And he kept on. Ginger moaned, squirmed, cursed, all quite quietly too, and ended in an incessant snivelling whimper, which was simply beastly. At last Squinty had had enough of it, and pushed Ginger down on the pavement at his feet. He lay there for 2 or 3 minutes, too dazed to move, but at last he scrambled up, blundered into the wall, and laying his head on his arm, cried like a small schoolboy. Eventually he shambled off, still whimpering, in the direction of the avenue, and so vanished into the night. I know what you're going to say. Why didn't I stop it? I ought to have, I suppose. But I'm not the stuff martyrs are made of. I wasn't at 22, anyway. Besides, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. A drizzly, beastly morning. I was miserable, cold, wet, and all in, physically as well as mentally. Oh, it's no excuse, I know. I did venture a feeble, "I say, that's enough," after a minute or so, but he took absolutely no notice of me. After all, it was only what Ginger had hoped was going to happen to me, and that extraordinary man could have done it too. I should have been a helpless kid in those infernal hands of his. When Ginger had disappeared, Squinty turned his regard on me. "A little lesson in elementary justice," he whispered softly. "I didn't notice that it was tempered with much mercy," said I. "It might have been you, you know," he retorted. "Still, I hardly think he deserved all that," I ventured. "I don't know that he did," he replied reflectively. "I overdid it, perhaps, but I enjoyed it. That's the main thing. A bit brutal, of course. Bullying is brutal. But it's a rough school, the gutter. Bully or be bullied. That's the rule. I bully. I like it. By means of judicious bullying, I retain a vestige of self-respect. If you get through your novitiate with us successfully, you will realize the truth of what I am saying. But I should say that you were amongst us, but not of us, if I may put it in that way. I certainly don't intend to stay here all my life. I've got a job to go to in a fortnight's time, only I'm absolutely broke now." "Oh, we must try and make your stay amongst us pleasant," he murmured politely. Then he leant forward and addressed the rest of the bench. "This gentleman will have Ginger's place during his short stay with us. I hope I shall always find my seat vacant for me," he added, turning to me again. "I may consider that I have received the freedom of the Embankment, then," I said, smiling a little. "Under those conditions, yes," he replied, gravely. "I shall do my best not to be bullied," I assured him. "It would annoy me to be compelled to bully you," he admitted. "This riffraff do not shine in the give and take of conversation. I waste my breath on them. Now, you appear to have a certain amount of intelligence. Callow, of course, but intelligent." I bowed my thanks. He grew thoughtful for a few minutes. "And to think," he murmured after a long silence, "to think that in a fortnight's time you go to swell the ranks of the world's workers. Every day you go and do your little best. Every week, with a grateful heart, you go up and draw your little stipend. Week after week, year after year. You get married. You beget children. Proud moment. And eventually, you cease to be a world's worker. They give you a small imitation marble tombstone with 'Sacred to the memory of,' etc. carved on it, and the village boys play leapfrog over it when the sexton isn't looking. It's a fatuous life." "It's better than the Embankment, anyhow," I said. "That, of course, is purely a matter of temperament," he answered. "Outside that, there is no arbitrary better or worse." "Some of the world's workers do work that lives after them," I suggested. "I wonder if they sleep any the sounder because their tombstone is real marble. with railings put round it to stop the small boys' innocent amusement," he said thoughtfully. He crossed his legs, and, putting his arm along the back of the bench, gazed down upon me benevolently. "If I were ever asked for my advice, which God forbid, but if I had to advise a young man, such as yourself, about to start on the journey of life, I fancy I should say, make no habits. Yes, I think I should say that." He repeated it slowly. "Make no habits." "Not even good ones?" I protested. "There are no good ones. They're all bad. Damn bad. Believe me, the lowest hell on earth is to have a habit that you can't break." He looked hard at me with one eye. The other appeared to be gazing out over the river. "The lowest hell," he repeated gloomily, and was silent for a space. Presently he began again. "You'd hardly believe that I was comparatively a rich man, would you?" he said, surprisingly. "I must say," I began. "Of course you wouldn't," he interrupted. "You're not a fool, but I am all the same. I've got 30 shillings a week coming in regularly. It goes to a little eating house I know. The landlady takes it and gives me 26 shillings of it. The other 4 shillings I take out of her in food." "Then why on earth do you sleep out here?" I asked. "Surely you could get a decent room?" "Just what I've been telling you," he wheezed. "Habit. Brandy, as it happens. I've tried to make it beer, but I can't. I could get more beer, too. I always make up my mind to be careful. Spend 3 and 9 a day on it and make it last the week. But it's no good. It always goes in the first 12 hours. 26 shillings worth of brandy in 12 hours? I cried incredulously. "Habit," he croaked. "Habit. And the hell of it is, I've lost the zest for it. It doesn't even make me drunk. This seat here," he patted it. "That's another habit. Close on 40 years I've had this seat. 40 years. Good God," I said involuntarily. "How awful." "There's no hell lower than the habits you can't break," he croaked. He muttered to himself for some time. I thought he was going to sleep, but suddenly he said fiercely, "Who says I can't break it?" Then more quietly he muttered, "I could if," and turned to me. "There's a way of breaking all habits, isn't there, eh?" His one sound eye glared at me. "It's a matter of strength of will," I ventured. "Ah, that's it," he muttered. "The will and the way. There's the way all right, if you've got the will." He got up and lurched over to the wall of the embankment. He leant his arms on it and looked out over the river for a minute or two. God knows what he saw. Then he turned half round towards me. "Never make habits," he wheezed across to me, and before I had any idea of what he meant to do, he was over. Well, there isn't much more to tell. You can guess the scene that followed. The usual crowd, which sprang up from nowhere, apparently. The usual rather officious policeman. They got the police boat round too, I fancy. I cleared out of it as soon as I could, but not before I'd heard the draggle-tailed old woman pronounce his epitaph. She cackled. "He was all as a one with Squinty." I needn't weary you with the rest of that weary night, nor with the equally weary day which followed it. I got through it somehow. What it was dragged my footsteps back to that damnable seat shortly after midnight is more than I can tell you. I didn't know where else to go, for one thing, I suppose. Perhaps it had a queer, morbid fascination for me. Anyhow, I went. Ginger's seat was waiting for me. Some of the others were there already. That drab old woman was one of them, and greeted me with that creaky laugh of hers. I sat down, then suddenly realizing that poor Squinty would not want his corner any more, I moved up and made myself more comfortable. I don't think I slept at all, but I may have dozed off for an odd minute now and then. I was just utterly listless, weary and dispirited. I had heard Big Ben strike 2 some minutes before, when I fancied I saw something moving on the wall of the embankment. I watched curiously. Yes, there was something. A man was scrambling over from the riverside. He flopped down on the pavement in an ungainly heap. He struggled to his feet again, and I saw that he was very tall. It was a man, of course. It must be. Only, if it was, what was it that was wrong with his face? I clutched my next-door neighbour by the arm. He looked up. I shall never forget the white terror on his face. "Christ," he sobbed. "Christ, he's Squinty," and faded into the night. One by one they got up and shambled off, in utter silence. Even the old woman forgot to cackle. And I... Have you ever been frightened? Frightened to the very soul of you? It's not worth it as an experience. Avoid it if you can. I sat still. I couldn't have moved for £1,000. I couldn't even call out. And the thing shuffled over to me and peered into my face. I won't try and tell you what it looked like. I don't want to spoil your night's rest. But the eyes that glared into mine, with a sort of smouldering fire at the back of them, squinted horribly. Then a wheezy, bubbling whisper came to me. "Damn you. You've got my seat again." I hadn't strength enough to get up, but somehow I managed to scramble along the seat, out of its way as it sat down. My hand just touched it for a second, and it was slimy, sodden, and icy cold. 40 years, it wheezed. 40 years of habit. You can't break it so easy as all that. I had to come back, you see. I had to come back. Somehow I managed to find my feet and ran, babbling incoherent nonsense, right into the arms of a burly policeman. "Here, what's your little game?" he said gruffly. I could only stutter out, "The seat, my God, the thing on the seat. It's Squinty. God," and point to the empty seat a few yards away. The policeman held me up. I was nearly falling, I trembled so. "Nightmare's the matter with you, my lad," he said, not unkindly. "There's nothing on the seat." I looked, trembling. The seat was empty. But I saw him," I stammered. "I saw him." "Come on," said he. "Look for yourself." He walked with me to the back of the now empty bench. "Nothing there," he said again, and swept his hand along the back of it to prove it to me. His hand stopped suddenly, and he looked at me oddly. "Which end was it?" he asked. That end, where you're standing now, I answered. He turned his bull's-eye on that end of the bench. There was nothing, only a little puddle of water. Nothing at all, he said, half to himself. Again he swept his hand across and stopped, drawing it away quickly. He turned to me with a queer look of disgust on his face. I believe you're right, lad, he said slowly. There's something there that I ain't anxious to move on. I can feel it. It's cold and wet. Ugh. Come along with me to the station. A cup of hot coffee will do us both good. On the way to the station, I told him the whole story. When we got there, he had a word or two with the sergeant, and eventually I was installed in front of a big fire with a cup of steaming coffee and a thick slice of bread and butter. Nobody worried me for the rest of the night, though I didn't sleep much, as you can guess. At 6 o'clock, my policeman returned and told me I was to go with him. I was too listless to wonder why. We were just moving off when we were stopped by the sergeant and another policeman. They've just got a body in from the river, said the sergeant. I was wondering if this young chap could identify. Precious little chance, I should think, sir, said the other policeman. He must have been in for a goodish bit, and besides, the screw of some steamer got him, poor beggar. It's took one arm and half his face off. But his eyes aren't touched, I whispered. And he squints horribly. My God, he's right, said the policeman. How the hell did you know that? That's why it's really a mistake to call it the empty seat, concluded my host, rising. It isn't empty. Squinty couldn't break the habit so easily. Today's story was On the Embankment by Hugh E. Wright. It was read by Jasper L'Estrange. Well, I do hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, sweet dreams.